by a little bit of a way of road mapping. I wouldn't be a former litigator if I didn't roadmap. We are going to cover two big topics today, supervision and mentorship. Within the supervision topic, we'll cover feedback and delegation. Of course, there's a Venn diagram between supervision and mentorship. Sometimes you're both a supervisor and a mentor. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two, but we'll cover supervision, feedback, delegation, and mentorship today. So if I could have the first poll, just to keep you all engaged. I know it's hard to pay attention to a Zoom presentation where I can't see you. I can only see what you put in the chat. This helps us keep it interactive and engaging. So if you take a minute and answer poll 1, which is, what is empathy? We'll give you a few seconds, maybe 15, 30 seconds to answer that, and then we'll see what you all have to say about what is empathy. All right, so a few of you say it's some touchy-feely concept that was never discussed when you went to law school. 69% of you say it's basically sympathy or feeling sorry for someone, and 25% of you say none of the above. So thank you for that feedback. I'm glad I didn't have too many people say, what in the world does empathy have to do with what you're discussing today, Colleen? Based on the research, the science is that we should approach supervision and mentorship with empathy if we want to impact performance. So I'll talk a little bit about the role of empathy. We'll talk about the definition of it, and then we'll talk about the role that empathy plays in performance in the workplace. So first, the definition. Empathy is generally understood to be the ability to sense other people's emotions and to imagine what they might be thinking or feeling. So it is a common misunderstanding that people often equate empathy to sympathy. They are different. They are distinguishable. Sympathy is I feel sorry for you. Empathy is I have a sense of what you might be feeling, and I can get in touch with that part in myself that recognizes that emotion. So it is a nuance that is different from sympathy. It's not exactly equal to sympathy. So just sort of nuancing that out, that it's the ability to sense other people's emotions and to imagine what they might be thinking or feeling. It's a key component to emotional intelligence. You may have heard about emotional intelligence. And I would suggest that empathy is a core competency of an effective lawyer, an effective law firm professional, an effective law firm leader. And the reason for that is that the research indicates a positive correlation between empathy and overall performance, team climate or culture, as well as employee retention. So those are all really important components to managing your practice, and empathy can really have an impact on those that's directly correlated. And so I would suggest that those lawyers and law firms who embrace a culture of empathy, not only towards their clients, but to their internal teams, are going to have a competitive advantage in the legal marketplace. So let's dive in a little bit further into what exactly are the qualities of empathy. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar, and she says there are 4 qualities of empathy. I like to just sort of nuance out empathy to try to make it more tangible. And some of the ways that we can show empathy are through perspective taking. So that's looking at it through somebody else's lens, staying out of judgment. So pausing what is totally normal in our neurobiology of judging and evaluating, just pausing that long enough to stay out of judgment at first. I'm not saying that you should always stay out of judgment, particularly if you're supervising or mentoring somebody. You may very well need to shift into that judgment and evaluative stage, but the initial sort of staying out of judgment long enough to gather the information, observe what's going on without instantly jumping to the right, wrong, should, shouldn't, good, bad. Recognizing emotion in other people, taking sort of an empathetic guess of what might they be thinking and feeling, and then communicating back the emotion you see. And this is the 4th one, is the piece that most people, whether we are lawyers or not, don't do, right? We may be able to take somebody else's perspective. We may be able to stay out of judgment. We may be able to recognize the emotions in the other people, but we often stop there and fail to communicate back the emotion we see, or fail to communicate it back effectively, right? For instance, we may say, I understand, which tells the person nothing because we have not shown them or illustrated to them that we do actually understand. What do we understand? So communicating back the emotion, for example, I'm noticing that your arms are crossed and I'm wondering if you're feeling defensive right now, or I'm wondering if you're feeling attacked, right? If we're about to have a feedback conversation, we'll get into that later. It may be that the person is showing you signs of feeling attacked or not open or receptive to what you have to say. So being able to communicate that back, the emotion that you see, to the other person, can be really important to help make sure that they feel heard and understood, and to create a space that's conducive for having a conversation about improvement and growth and development. Dr. Brene Brown is a sociologist, psychologist, and so she's been known to say clear is kind. When I coach people and work with people on giving feedback, people are notorious, lawyers and non-lawyers are notoriously bad at giving feedback, whether it's positive or negative. I like to stick with sort of simple, bare bones building blocks, and clear is kind, right? And the more clear we are about our expectations and how they have not been met, the more we have a kind environment, workplace, we establish a thriving culture, we have a better shot at retaining top talent, and we tend to increase employee engagement and productivity. So these are all important reasons why empathy within supervision and mentorship are critically important in managing your practice. All right. And then there is also some international research that shows that empathy was the single most important driver of overall performance. And so while I haven't dug into exactly all the details of the research, I do think that it's pretty powerful that there's been some international research done that shows that above many other factors that they analyzed, empathy was the single most important driver of overall performance in the workplace. So pretty important to make sure that we hone in on that. Let me check the chat. All right, all good there. All right. So let's talk a little bit about supervision as sort of our broad category under which we're going to discuss feedback and delegation, right? And so I suspect that unless you practice by yourself and don't have any staff, you're familiar with the fact that you need to supervise. And it's really the cornerstone of an effective legal practice management. And yes, it is guiding and overseeing work, but it also includes giving feedback, creating an environment where employees feel valued, trying to look for opportunities for people to grow and develop. I would be remiss if I didn't touch on some of the ethics of supervision. So I know we have people from lots of different jurisdictions, so I'm just looking at the ABA model rules of professional conduct. Of course, you should double check your jurisdiction's rules just in case there are any deviations from the model rules. But Rule 5.1 and 5.3 talk about supervising other lawyers and supervising non-lawyers. And the rule provides that the supervising attorney needs to make reasonable efforts to ensure that the person's conduct comports with the professional obligations of the lawyer. And the rule goes on to say that the lawyer needs to, if the lawyer has any sort of managerial authority in the firm, then they need to make reasonable efforts to ensure that the firm has, in effect, measures giving reasonable assurance that the person's conduct is compatible, and they might also need to make reasonable efforts to establish internal policies and procedures designed to provide that reasonable assurance about conformity with the rules. And so one important policy and procedure that you could use to make sure that you meet these compliance requirements is by providing feedback. And it could be in a formal written annual review process, but it certainly also could be, let's not miss opportunities for I'm going to call them more one-off feedback opportunities, whether it's positive or negative, that come up regularly in the day-to-day practice. All right. So let's talk about feedback, because Um, I do a lot of development work with lawyers and law firms, and I regularly have um, staff and young attorneys in particular who say to me they don't receive any feedback at all. They have no clear understanding of what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. They assume no news is good news and that they are on the right track, but they do not know. And if you recall, when you first started practicing, it's already a pretty overwhelming and uncertain time. And if you don't have any feedback, um, that can just add to the uncertainty, the anxiety, and stress that's already prolific in our profession. And then we miss opportunities to reinforce the positive and also to develop and grow on the negative side. So I'm going to show you a few frameworks and a few models for one for giving positive feedback, one for giving negative feedback. I'm going to give you my specific example, but if there is a particular situation that you would like some help with shaping the feedback, if you want to anonymously pose a hypothetical in the Q&A, you are welcome to do that, and I will try to apply the framework that I'm suggesting to your specific example. Of course, it's an anonymized hypothetical that you'd be proposing to make sure that we're not, violating any confidentiality or employment rules or issues. But if you'd like to put a specific challenge around feedback in the Q&A, I will try my best to address it. Okay. So first, let's talk a little bit about positive reinforcement, right? It is good for business and it's good for you, right? So offering feedback generally is going to help people perform better. It influences morale, productivity, and professional satisfaction. When people receive feedback, they're more fully engaged, and it makes them better equipped to handle their responsibilities and challenges within the firm. So, why does feedback matter? Why should we do it? Increases employee engagement, increases job satisfaction and well-being, and people feel valued and morale improves. So, it's not only good for the person receiving the feedback, but it's also good for business because it promotes engagement and productivity, boosts that morale, creates a culture of learning and growth, and helps that individual and the whole team develop and then ultimately serve the clients more effectively. I don't have retention on here, but this does also play a role in retaining top talent, right? And I have worked with and anecdotally heard young lawyers look for other opportunities because they're not getting feedback, supervision, or mentorship where they are, and that they feel like that's stifling their growth and their opportunity to develop as a lawyer. Additionally, our brains process verbal affirmations or verbal recognition similarly to how we process financial rewards. So making verbal recognition or praise can be a really powerful motivator that fosters loyalty, morale, and commitment. And then in terms of the well-being piece, you all know by now that I'm a little bit of a brain science geek. And so when we get sincere and thoughtful feedback, the serotonin and dopamine responses, those neurotransmitters in our brain, get a boost. So we increase the serotonin and dopamine, and that promotes a feeling of well-being. It makes us feel better. It makes us feel good. And so it's not only going to benefit the recipient of the feedback, but also everybody in the firm because you're creating a sort of that mutually beneficial dynamic that fosters positive relationships within the firm, promotes, increases job satisfaction and well-being. All right, let me address the Q&A. All right. how do you handle one partner having a bad day and acting poorly and taking it out on the staff and maybe other partners or other colleagues? Um, so it's a tough one. Um, if it's a one-off, I think that's a little different than if it's a pattern, right? Um, I think I can't remember if I've previously covered Bill Eddy's ear as in part one or not, but Bill Eddy is a lawyer and a mediator, and I think he's also trained as a therapist. He has written several books. One of them is called Ear Statements, um, EAR. It's an acronym for empathy, attention, and respect. The E is empathy, the A is attention, and the R is respect. I can't remember the exact title of his book, but it's Ear Statements for handling upset people or some calming upset people or something like that. And so if this is a partner, right? So there's always the dynamic of seniority or the power dynamic of reporting structures. But if this is a partner that you're on a relatively level plane with, my instinct would be to pull the partner aside and have a private conversation. And let me pause and apply this question when we get to the tool for giving negative feedback, which is the DESC model, DEC, which we'll get to in a few slides. All right. So the first step in getting better buy-in with feedback conversations is to preemptively ask the question before you start giving the feedback. Can I give you feedback? This may seem simple, but we don't generally like to give feedback at all. So we tend to avoid it and not do it. And then when we do it, we feel uncomfortable. We want to rush through it. We just want to get done with it. And so we maybe don't do it as effectively as we could. The first step is to ask somebody, can I give you feedback? Maybe even before that is, do you have time to talk to me right now? Right? We want to make sure that they are in a space where they have time to have a conversation. And then you want to ask them, can I give you feedback? Can I give you some feedback? However you want to phrase it, you want to ask the question and wait for them to say yes. And the reason for that is because social conventions will lead them, for the most part, to say yes. And then they're more likely to be receptive to what you're saying because they've already said yes and given you permission to have this conversation with the person. It also sometimes will prime the person to think the worst. And so then when you do give them the feedback, they're like, oh, that really wasn't that bad. So it can really help pave the way for a better feedback conversation. All right, so first let's start with positive feedback, and I'll give you a model for that. And then we'll cover negative feedback and a model for that. So it's important to understand why we don't give positive feedback. So ask yourself the question of, why do I not give positive feedback, right? Is it because I think I shouldn't have to thank somebody for doing what their job requires them to do? Is it because I don't know how to do it? Is it because it doesn't occur to me, right? What are the roadblocks? What are the obstacles that prevent us from giving positive feedback? And then remember that it's an opportunity to reinforce positive behaviors and habits. If you like what you're seeing and you want it to happen again, positively reinforcing that is going to increase the likelihood that that person is going to continue the behavior or the particular thing that you do like and that you want more of. It's going to improve your culture as a whole, and it's going to increase retention. So think about the pros weighing out the cons. And for the most part, I think we don't get positive feedback because it doesn't occur to us. We don't slow down and have enough time to do it. And I think also some of us think, well, why should I praise them for doing their job? Okay. Let me give you the framework, give you an example, and see if this helps incentivize you to give positive feedback. I'm not suggesting you need to do it every day. I'm not suggesting you need to do it every hour, but thinking about working it in occasionally into your practice. So I came up with an acronym, CIA. It's easy for me to remember. I wish it was SIA, but CIA is a little bit easier. So clearly state what was the specific task or the project. I is for impact. What was the impact on the person, the team, or the client? And then A is the acknowledgement of what did it take? In other words, what was the sacrifice, or what was the thing that made it perhaps not so easy for the person to do, and that really added the value to the team. So what was the specific task or project? What was the impact on the person, the team, or the client? And then acknowledging what it took, or what was the sacrifice that was made to make it happen. Let me give you an example of not so effective positive feedback. Great job. Thank you. All right. Why is this not very effective? It's vague. It's not clear what specifically did the person do that was great? How did they do it that was great? Why was it great? What was the impact that it had? Thank you. What exactly are you thanking them for? If we're not specific, then we're less likely to get a repeat of the positive thing that we are appreciative of. So how could we do it better? Applying CIA. We could try, I appreciate your attention to detail in editing the brief and ensuring that it was timely filed with each of the accompanying exhibits. It is helpful for me to know that I can count on your organizational skills. It also gives me some relief to know that you're staying on top of deadlines so that we have at least 2 people tracking deadlines. I know this takes extra time, attention, and effort on your part, which adds value to our client, right? So the C is clearly state the specifics. Your attention to detail in what did they do? Edited the brief, made sure it was timely filed, and made sure it had each of the accompanying exhibits. And then what was the impact? I know I can count on your organizational skills, so that gives me some relief. It gives me some relief to know that somebody else is my backstop to track the deadlines, so that we have 2 people as a redundancy to track the deadlines, and then acknowledge the sacrifice. I know this takes extra time and attention and effort on your part. And impact, again, it adds value to our client. So it's not just the impact on me, but also connecting it to the bigger picture. That's another thing that I hear from staff and less experienced lawyers, is that they would really like to know how their particular step in the process connects to the bigger picture, connects to the value that you bring to the client, connects to the firm as a whole, right? They want to meaningfully contribute to the whole. And sometimes when they just have a discrete piece of it, it's harder for them to see how it connects to the bigger picture. And so sometimes connecting that dot for them to really help them see that they do add value as a whole and it is appreciated and vital can be really helpful, particularly if it is maybe a redundant task or a task that doesn't particularly light them up or doesn't particularly feel exciting or meaningful. For them to understand that you have connected the dots, that it is vitally important because it's a stepping stone for the next task, or, for whatever reason, connecting it to the bigger picture helps them see that they are a valuable part of the team and that they are a contribution. A lot of the younger lawyers and staff that I've talked to and heard from have said that they really want to be part of the team and they really need help connecting those dots. Okay. I'm reading a question. How should I handle a boss who gives a constant stream of feedback, both positive and negative? And it's so constant and socially awkward that I feel like he's acting like he's training a puppy. That's really interesting. I honestly have never had anybody tell me that they get too much feedback. I've always heard that they don't get enough. Um, Sort of my initial reaction is um, thinking about different communication styles and different thinking styles. And so, could it be that this person is an external processor, meaning that they speak to process everything, whereas I am an internal processor. So I will be silent and contemplative, and I will even have to tell people sometimes, especially if I'm on the phone, I'm thinking, right? Because I'm silent and they may think that we've lost the connection on the call, right? I'm working it through without speaking and then I'll speak. But other people, perhaps a boss, this boss is this way, have to work it through by speaking it. So there's that piece. And then there's just different communication styles and what people value. Um, so I guess let's use both of the examples that have already been asked. These are great questions. Keep them coming. When we get to give the framework for negative feedback, which we're going to get to in a minute, because both of them seem like we're requesting a change. We're requesting something isn't working for us that needs to change. So that's going to fall under the negative feedback, which we use the DESC model for, DESC, and I'll get to that in a minute. Another helpful tool that I wasn't planning to cover today, and I doubt we have time for, is the framework that Marshall Rosenberg teaches in his nonviolent communication. And I suspect that when we concluded and had a little extra time in the communication part one, I probably mentioned Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. His framework is to sort of make an observation, state how you're feeling and what you're needing, and then make a request, a specific request of what do you want them to start, stop, or continue doing. It's not all that dissimilar from the DESC method that we're going to get to in a minute. There's a lot of sort of overlap between the two. But I think for both of these specific examples, let's look at the DESC method and then also think about Marshall Rosenberg's framework for nonviolent communication, which is essentially how do you clearly, kindly make a powerful request, right? Without while maintaining the relationship, right? Without destroying the relationship, without accusing somebody of something. All right. So let's talk about negative feedback. All right. I've mentioned it already, previewed it enough. Here's the DESC method. This model was developed by Sharon and Gordon Bauer, and the acronym is DESC. The D is for describe. So, what is the specific behavior or action with objective facts and without blaming or accusing? So, similar to Marshall Rosenberg's framework, it's observing without judgment. So, stick to just the facts, ma'am, right? Think about the objective facts that nobody's going to be able to argue without judgment words, without blaming or accusing. So let's use the boss that is overly full of feedback. What is the specific behavior or the action? When you give me frequent feedback, okay, if you add excessive or constant, those are your perceptions of reality. He may disagree with them and not think that they are, constant or excessive, right? So the objective facts are when you repeatedly offer me feedback, And then the E is express your feelings about the behavior using I statements as opposed to you statements, right? So I feel whatever you feel. I feel overwhelmed. I feel confused. I'm just guessing. I don't know what you feel with that, right? Sort of the why does it bother you? Um, I feel condescended to. If you feel like you're a puppy being trained, maybe you feel like it's condescending. Maybe you feel talked down upon. I'm just guessing here. And then S, specify the outcome or behavior that you want, right? You need to spend some time. The best way to give feedback is to prepare in advance for the feedback conversation. So you need to really think through, what is it that you would like from this person? What do you specifically want them to start doing differently, to stop doing, or to continue doing? Is it, I would like for you to save your feedback, and we have a one-on-one weekly meeting. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there, right? Think about what it is you actually want to happen differently. And then the consequences state clearly what will happen if the behavior changes. This can be either negative or positive. It is generally encouraged to try to lean towards the positive. So it could be, when you regularly offer me feedback, I feel confused and condescended to. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to save your feedback for our weekly one-on-one meetings, and then the consequence, so that we can build a stronger relationship and be more efficient. I don't know, right? So the idea is to think through, what is the specific behavior or action that is the challenge? How do you feel about it? And so you're using I statements instead of, you're a weirdo. Specify exactly what you want them to do differently. And then the consequences if that behavior changes, ideally aiming towards a positive consequence that, so that we can improve our working relationship, for instance. The partner that's acting poorly, I'm not sure if I have enough facts, but I'm going to just try to go with your question. So, describe the specific behavior. When you raise your voice in a staff meeting, or when you raise your voice in the conference room, when you slam your hands on the table in the conference room, right? The specific objective thing, right? If you call it yelling, the partner may say, I'm not yelling, right? So think about the objective facts that can't be argued with. When the volume of your voice goes up, when your hand slams on the table, right? Whatever it is that has you believing that they are acting poorly, express your feelings. I worry about our firm culture, or I worry about the staff person. I worry they're going to leave. I worry they're going to quit. I worry you're going to get a harassment suit filed against us. I don't know, whatever your specific feelings are about the behavior, and then specify the outcome or behavior that you want instead. It could be baby steps. It could be, would you be willing to have a conversation with me about it so that we can work to improve this and maintain, improve our firm culture and retain our employees, right? It might be that your first ask is just, can we have a conversation about it? And then later you might think through, what is the specific behavior that you want? Can you agree to not raise your voice? Can you agree to follow Colleen's children and do rainbow breathing or starfish breathing, right? So my kids are in elementary school, and anytime I lose my cool, they're like, "What, Mom, why didn't you do your rainbow breathing?" I feel about this big. And, rainbow breathing is, you make a rainbow with your hands, but you're inhaling and exhaling. Starfish breathing is you inhale up, exhale down, inhale up, exhale down. And I'm not suggesting that you need to talk with your managing partners about elementary school tactics to stay calm. But if the behavior that's unacceptable is an outward display, then the specific outcome or behavior that you're requesting change is, what can you do to maintain a professional working environment, right? All right. Hopefully that addresses the questions that I've gotten so far. Feel free, if there are others, to put them in the Q&A. Let me give you an example of ineffective negative feedback. I can't believe the pleading style isn't up to date. It's one of your primary functions of your job. So this is blaming and is specific, but it's not describing the impact on me, how I'm feeling, what I would like the change to be, or the consequences if we have that change. So a better way to say it following the desk method is, when the pleadings file is not organized and up to date, I feel embarrassed, stressed, and caught off guard in court. I would like to know what obstacles are getting in the way of your timely updating of the pleadings file so that we can find a solution that ensures I have what I need to effectively represent our client in court, right? Can you see the difference between the first one? I'm just going to blame and the person's going to shut down. And I also lose the opportunity to acquire the information of what is the obstacle getting in the way? Why is the pleadings file not timely up to date? Do we have a system or a process issue that I, as the supervising attorney or the manager, need to figure out? Like, we need to get to the bottom of it. So blaming and accusing shuts the conversation down. I lose the opportunity for information, and then also lose the opportunity to build rapport with my colleague to figure out and sort of jointly share in the solution of, how do we find a solution so that I have what I need, and ultimately remind everybody that why we're doing all of this is to represent our clients, right? It's not just that I'm a control freak and I need to be organized. That is also true, but I need to be organized so that I can effectively represent the client in court in this particular matter. This was an actual real life example of mine, so that's why I feel so strongly about it. All right. I want to make sure we cover the rest of the things we need to cover, but feel free to put questions in the Q&A. So we'll move on briefly to delegation. I've also, in the work that I've done with lawyers and law firms, heard regularly and repeatedly that delegation is a challenge. I've heard procrastinators. I've heard people who have a hard time delegating because they don't want to let control of anything go. I've heard they don't trust that somebody else is going to get it done. I have heard of a story where, somebody loves to just walk the halls up and down instead of doing their work, right? That's a form of procrastination. So to avoid procrastinating and prioritize what you should be working on, one model, there's lots of different models, but one model that I find particularly helpful is the Eisenhower matrix. And so I don't know who to give credit to for this. I don't know who created it. I don't know if it was Eisenhower or somebody else analyzing former president and former five-star general Dwight D. Eisenhower. But this is a well-known matrix for how to prioritize things in a pretty simple tool. And so Eisenhower, I think, was famous for saying, what is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. And so this matrix is looking at my buttons around my screen. All right. So if it is both important and urgent, then we need to do it now. If it is important but not as urgent, then we need to plan it. In other words, schedule time to do it. If it is urgent but not important, then we need to drop it or just delete it altogether. If it is urgent and important, then if it is important but not urgent, we need to delegate it, right? And then follow up. Okay. So also sort of looking at what are the tasks that have a direct effect on client service, client delivery, and the revenue that you bring into your practice, whatever that may be. And then those are the ones you need to prioritize. You need to either do it now or schedule it. Look at what can you delegate. And then if it is not, doesn't have a direct effect on client service or what you bring into the firm, query, does it need to be on here at all, or can it just be dropped? Okay. When you are delegating, be sure you're setting clear expectations. Again, when I train, coach, and consult with lawyers and law firms, I hear regularly, they don't tell me when it needs to get done, and then they're mad when I don't do it by that time. Okay, it's a two-way street on delegation. The person delegating should say, here's what I need, here's when I need it by. However, if that doesn't happen, the person who is being delegated to should also be trained, empowered, and encouraged to then ask the question, by when do you need this? Because I want to make sure that we're tracking and our expectations are clear and that we're all on the same page. When do you need this? So that you have a specific deadline. Because there are lots of stories that I've heard of people getting frustrated that something's not done, but there was never a clear communication of what was the deadline, whether that's an internal deadline or an actual, fixed deadline by the court, the statute of limitations, whatever, what the closing date, whatever the case may be. Often it comes up that somebody has a more an earlier internal deadline that doesn't get met, and then everybody's stressed about it to try to meet the external fixed deadline. And often when we unpack it, is that was never communicated. So make sure that there are clear expectations being set when the delegation is happening. And then part of being a supervisor is keeping track of who'd you delegate to and what, so that you can then follow up if it doesn't get done. And does that stink about being the delegator? Yes. But it is what it is. Another point on prioritization, look at your to-do list and prioritize it by what is the most important. So the most important thing, so there's lots of different approaches to this. Some people say, your top 2 important things that have to get done that day. Some people say your top 3. I tend to like top 3 myself. I like lists. You don't have to like lists, but I've got sort of a matter or a task list that has sort of, here are my big things. And then from that, I use a sticky note that every morning that has my top 3 priorities for that day. And if I'm noticing my attention is going to something, I come back to my sticky note and I see, is what's drawing my attention helping me accomplish one of these 3 priorities? If the answer is no, then I need to look at how I'm spending my time. And email is one of the biggest time sucks and distractors that exists. And so I would highly encourage you to give yourself permission to close your email and take this lovely device that is your phone and put it out of your reach so that you have focused time where you can really work on the top priorities that are urgent and important that need to get done. You can also schedule time and you can time block. So time blocking is setting, 1 or 2 hours or whatever period of time you want to work on your particular thing, your particular matter, your particular brief, your closing, whatever that might be. And you give yourself permission that nothing else distracts you during that time block. People who time block will also sometimes put in 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at lunch, 30 minutes at 4:30 p.m. to check their email, because it is important that you are responsive to email. But that way it doesn't consume your whole day and override the time that you need for what I like to call deep work, to really dig into something meaty and that maybe needs 30 to 60 to 90 to 120 minutes of really focused attention. And then another scheduling piece is, so like for if it is important, but it's not urgent, like think about things that recur. Think of billing, think of checking in on AR, maybe one-on-one meetings with your team members, maybe social media posts. Those things can be scheduled. They can be scheduled on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, whatever your cadence needs to be. Those things can be scheduled out because they are important, but not urgent. All right. Question about delegating. All right. So why are managers bad delegators, and what are the basic skills or techniques that they can focus on to get better? I don't think all managers are bad delegators. I think that often we don't analyze what is important and urgent. We think everything is important and urgent. And I would suggest to you that that's just not the case. And so I do think that one of the skills or techniques is to sit down at the beginning of every day. Some people actually do it at the end of the day before. Either way works. Try either way. See what works best for you. To really make that list of that, what I call ruthless prioritization. What are the mission critical priorities today? Sometimes I find it's easier to do it for a week, right? So sometimes I would do it on Friday afternoon before I left the office for the weekend, because that helped me have a little bit more peace and spaciousness for the weekend, to know that I had looked out ahead for the following week and I had figured out what are my priorities for next week, and then reverse engineer into what needs to be done each of the days of the week in order to accomplish the priorities for the week. And then that, for me, was a sticky note that stayed front and center of, what needs to be done first, what needs to be done second, what needs to be done third. And so I might look at a month calendar and then break it down into a week, and then break it down into daily, and its prioritization. On the delegation piece, I think you have to ask yourself honestly, what is getting in the way of you delegating? Is it that you can't let go of the control? Is it that you don't have time to train somebody? Is it you don't trust somebody? What is the particular challenge, so that we can then build a plan around it? If it's that you haven't trained up the people around you to do it, how can we get them trained? How can we get them the resources they need to be able to handle the matters that you delegate to them? Are there particular processes that are repetitive that you need to sort of write a very simple step-by-step procedure or checklist for, that will help them get trained, right? We have a false sense that we don't have time to delegate. But yet, if we did take 20 minutes to sit and train the person, or have a checklist for them, or have them watch you do it once, then the next 20 times that they do it, times 20 minutes, they can do it. And so in the long run, yes, you're going to have to take the time on the front end, but then you'll get the return on the investment on the back end. All right, let's move on to mentorship real quickly. So like I said, there's a Venn diagram between mentorship and supervision. There's a lot of crossover. Supervision tends to be a little bit more narrow focus, task or project oriented, maybe a little bit more formal. Mentorship maybe is more broad development, holistic, and more informal. But there is a lot of overlap. And particularly in a small firm, you may be a supervisor and a mentor. Why is mentorship important? For a lot of the same reasons that supervision is important. It supports individual growth and development, strengthens the firm's culture, and it fosters the transmission of knowledge. right? So particularly since we're a learned profession and it sort of was built upon an apprentice model, we really need to help mentor the younger generation to help transmit our knowledge. What are the characteristics that define a strong mentor relationship? Essentially, how can you make sure that you are a good mentor? You need to listen. You need to be open and flexible. You need to share your knowledge. Be available to each other. I know lots of firms that assign mentors to younger attorneys, and then the younger attorney says, that's all fine and dandy, but I can never, ever get any time with my mentor. The door is always shut. They're always on the phone. They're always on a deadline, right? So a willingness to be available to each other, a willingness to take your mentee to share lunch at some point, a willingness to give constructive feedback in an honest way and to connect them with resources. So maybe it's sharing your network with them. Maybe it's encouraging them to go to a particular continuing ed course, and then mutual respect. And then what about mentees? What should you seek from a mentor? You need to first figure out, what would you like to get out of the mentor relationship? It's not, just you sit there and wait for your mentor to distill all this wonderful knowledge towards you. It could be broad career guidance. Looking back on your career, what did you wish you had learned sooner? What do you think most contributed to your success? And then what specific new skills should you develop to improve that will serve you well in your career? Maybe it's an acute issue with a more specific challenge, like a professional relationship dynamic, a substantive legal issue that you're wrestling with, or an ethical quandary. I know the ethical quandaries always had me running to a mentor in particular, because they're thorny, they're sticky, and it can be really helpful to have a mentor in that situation. And then similarly to how to be a good mentor, how to be a good mentee, is make sure that you understand the communication preference and cadence that works best for your mentor, right? They are sharing their time and their knowledge with you. How do they best like to be communicated with? If they don't like text messaging, don't text message them. If they much prefer face-to-face, but you really don't, you got to work through that communication preference. Do they prefer once a month lunch instead of, being pestered constantly when an ethical issue comes up? Figure out what the cadence is. Be flexible, have a growth mindset, be open-minded, and then be willing to problem solve. And I know that I am running out of time, so I will just end with, based on what you heard today, you don't have to share it with anyone, but the science is that if you think of and write down one thing that you commit to doing differently today, based on what you heard today, then there's a better chance that that thing will stick with you and you will actually do something with the information you learned today. So with that, I will turn it back over to Todd.
Okay. Well, if we do get some questions here, if we have a few after, we can stay, like I said, stay a little bit longer. But Colleen, thank you so much. I can say from my own personal leadership and management experience, how easy it is to overlook the importance of elements such as empathy and providing feedback to our clients, partners, employees, and honestly, how to initiate productive dialogue with them. I really like the Eisenhower matrix. I wish I had known about that a little earlier in my career. Highly valuable. And by the way, not limited to just the legal professions. Everything you were talking about is across the business board. So thank you again. So at this point in the series, after 3 sessions, we have delivered over 700 hours of free CLE to attendees, with one more session to go on in the mini-MBA series on November 6th. That'll be titled Negotiate Like a Pro. So this will conclude part 3 of our 4-part series. And thanks to everybody who attended. We try to provide you with the best CLE through recognized subject matter experts such as Colleen, and hope you find this a beneficial use of your time. And don't forget, sign up for the final chapter of the series, part 4, on November 6th, Negotiate Like a Pro. This session will highlight the keys to successfully negotiating with clients and achieve what's in the negotiating world is a win-win scenario for all parties, which is the goal of all successful negotiations for both you and your clients. And finally, on December the 11th, Colleen will be hosting our final free CLE webinar of the year at our 5th annual wellness webinar. So don't forget to sign up for that. Now, let me address some of the closing elements here. Mike, have you got that slide you can put back up? There we go. Yep. All right. I mentioned about the survey. It will be popping up here momentarily. The second code word is 3. First code word is part 3. And I also want to make sure that you let us know if you need any kind of expedited service to get your CLE credit. So with that, I will let you go. Thank you very much. Are we have any questions that we need to address? It looks like we do.
Yeah, I can stay on. For those of you who would like to jump off, you are welcome to jump off. If you want to stay, you're welcome to stay. Is there a best time during the day to delegate? That's a great question. I would say any time is better than no time, right? The problem that most people have is that they don't delegate at all. Do what works best for you. For me, the first part of the day is when I am the freshest, when I'm the most energized. And I personally like to delegate the beginning of the day, the beginning of the week. I know several lawyers have a one-on-one standing meeting with their paralegal or their assistant on Monday, right? Here are all the things that need to happen today, this week, right? So that they're clear on their expectations. So I would say there's not necessarily a best time that I'm aware of. You need to figure out what works for you. I'm a morning person. I am most fresh in the morning. And so the morning would be my preference. It also, I think, gives the person you're delegating to the whole day or what time, more time they need to accomplish the task. Much has been said about managing Gen Z. Can all of that be ignored in favor of managing the individual, or are there aspects of the discussed strategies to emphasize or de-emphasize? I think it's a good question. I would say that I am not an expert in multi-generational strategies per se. I haven't really studied or researched that myself. I would say definitely always look at the individual. What are their preferences? What is their style? And if you don't know, it's okay to ask, right? It's okay to say, my preference is ABC, right? Or I've noticed that I am an internal processor. I've also noticed that it's really helpful. I'm a really visual learner, right? So you can lead with your own information and then ask them to share whatever it is you're trying to learn from them, right? But again, connect the dots for them and tell them, because I'm really interested in improving our working relationship, or I'm really value our working relationship. I'd like to know, ways to continue to improve it. And then you lead with sort of, here's what I've learned about myself. Could you help me tell me about your styles and preferences so that we can work together effectively, right? Yeah, it's a good point. One of the questions is why praise? Why not focus on defining what worked well and encouragement? And I would say absolutely focus on what worked well and encouragement. And the issue is to be specific, because often our encouragement is very general. It's great job, great presentation, right? I'm picking on you all because I appreciate that you have said great presentation, but to apply what we're learning today, that doesn't tell me what specifically about the presentation was great, right? And so the emphasis is not on, are we praising, are we encouraging? The emphasis is on, are we being specific enough so that the person knows what did work well so that they can repeat it? And what about it working well impacted the bigger picture for the benefit? Um, Another example of applying to the desk method. Do you have a particular issue that you want me to apply it to? I will also try to think. Um, so I just thinking back, I always had frustrations with IT, right? And I always felt like IT and I didn't speak the same language. There was some foreign language that I was not familiar with. We seemed to be speaking English, but it just wasn't connecting. And so it could be when um, when my computer doesn't work, I feel stressed out, and I honestly I feel completely dead in the water, and you know inefficient and ineffective, and like I'm literally wasting my time because I can't work on client billable matters. Would you be willing to tell me what your plan of attack is and your estimated time for completion so that I can know how to proceed? Right? That would be one example of, instead of me saying, I think you're incompetent because you're not telling me anything that's going on. I think you're just doing trial and error and you don't know what you're doing, right? Because that was the judgy part of me. That's what I felt, right? But it was really that they were internal processors, and that some of the nature of IT is they have to do trial and error to figure out what exactly is going on. So the more effective way to give that negative feedback would be to say, when my computer unexpectedly won't work for me, it's incredibly frustrating and stressful for me because I feel like I literally can't do my job and I'm on tight timelines with the court. Would you be willing to tell me what your plan of attack is and what the ETA is so that I can figure out how to proceed, right? Or would you be willing to get me set up on a loaner laptop, right? Whatever your request is. So that would be another example. Um, to prevent the creation of a hostile work environment. Yeah, I think without knowing more specifics. So if we're going back to sort of our partner who is behaving poorly, right? It could be when you raise your voice, when when you express your frustration or dissatisfaction in an aggressive way, right? Whatever the particular specific behavior is, um, you could then share your feeling. I feel scared. I feel worried because I'm concerned about it creating a hostile work environment. Would you be willing to schedule a time to talk with me about better strategies for how we're going to, you know, enhance the culture of our firm? Be one example. I think that's a wrap.